very important that the team got recognition. It wasn't just me. I wanted to put St George's, certainly the Sports Cardiology, the inherited cardiac conditions team, on the map, and I think I did that successfully.
Welcome to Season 2 of the sOOPR podcast. In these conversations, we're bringing you even more insights from successful fellows and advice from leaders from across the UK research landscape. I'm Nikhil Alawalia, and this is brought to you by the British Junior Cardiologists Association in partnership with the BHF CRC. If you like these videos, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave your comments below. So now I just want to touch on sports cardiology as a niche, because I know there are many fellows who are interested in a more unusual or less focused area within cardiology. And I imagine that when you started your thesis and your database, sports cardiology wasn't as renowned as it is today. So can you take me through your thought process when you dived into doing some research into an area that wasn't intervention or heart failure, and whether you had any idea about how it was going to progress to what it is today?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for asking me that. I was very interested in, well, not interested, horrified would be the right word, in young athletes dying. I mean, it doesn't happen often, but when it does, it's usually publicized very heavily in the media. And it got me thinking why someone who is so young and fit could possibly just die. And I started reading about this condition called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, and that this condition was characterized by abnormal thickening of the heart muscle. And I started asking myself, well, if you exercise a lot, your heart muscle thickens. So, and if you drop dead, you usually drop dead from a condition like hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. So how do we tell the difference between a thick heart muscle due to exercise versus a thick heart muscle due to hypertrophic cardiomyopathy? And I got talking to the former professor at St George's called Bill McKenna, who clearly doesn't really need much of an introduction. And he invited me to have an interview because he was the expert in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy at the time. And I wanted to talk to him about this. And he felt this was a very, very good idea, that we should be doing this, and that he had a huge database of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy patients that I could use for comparison. But it was going to be my job to try and make links with sporting clubs to try and test all of these elite athletes. He also introduced me to a woman called Alison Cox, who was the chief executive of Cardiac Risk in the Young. And I think that's probably the best thing that ever happened to me in my career. Being introduced to Alison, who had just started up a charity really to protect young athletes from sudden cardiac death after her own son collapsed whilst playing tennis during a scholarship in the United States. She was really, really hell-bent on making sure something happened in the UK. So she had contacts with tennis, and tennis were the first club that came on board with cardiac screening. And so we were doing ECGs and echoes on all these elite tennis players. And then I met another chap called Greg White, who also doesn't need an introduction. He's trained so many top people. He's a TV star in his own right. He was a former Olympiad. He got me involved with the triathlon and the pentathlon. And from there, I started making contact with rowers, football teams, and built up a really good database, which allowed me to do lots of observational research. I was making observations about the maximal wall thickness, the maximal limits of the wall thickness, the ECG patterns in children versus adults versus black versus white versus females versus males. And we started publishing this data. And we realized then that there were so many myths that people were under that T-wave inversion, for example, in the lateral leads as a normal finding in athletes. It was far from normal. And I think this led to a spate of numerous publications in a very short space of time, how one differentiates between hypertrophic cardiomyopathy and pathological left ventricular hypertrophy. And I think it was these publications and these presentations at large meetings that led to me getting some recognition. And clearly success bred success. I then did I finished my MD thesis, and that was vivaed by Dan Tunstall-Pedo, who was the former medical director of the London Marathon. And some of it was luck. He had Parkinson's disease, and he said to me, look, I just can't manage to run this alone. Would you shadow me and support this? And of course, I shadowed him about 3 to 4 years, and he said, I'm going to hand this over to you. From there, I became medical director of the London Marathon. And then, of course, the London Marathon had built They added in the Prudential Ride London, the half marathon, the Bupa 10K. And I think with the reputation, he also became advisor to the English Institute of Sport when it came to sport cardiology. And having the backing of cardiac risk in the young, quite a lot of backing for research, we could build up mass in terms of personnel and hire really good fellows that, we sort of became a bit of a production line for research in inherited cardiac conditions and sport cardiology. And I think that's really been, where the journey's gone. Some of it's been obviously sheer hard work, but a lot of it has been, a lot of fortune, bumping into Bill McKenna, Alison Cox, Greg White, funding from CRY, just fortuitously, hiring really good fellows. So hard work and luck, but we are where we are. And I sometimes do pinch myself when I think about, the achievement, because when I went to see Bill McKenna, I thought this was a three-year out of program situation. And I remember him asking me at the end, he said, so where do you see yourself? And he was expecting me to say, I see myself as becoming a professor and setting up my own unit. And I said to him, I see myself rolling my sleeves up and going on the wards and then putting pacemakers in and doing angioplasty. And he looked at me, he said, really? He said, is that what you've worked so hard for? Is that what you really want to do in your life? And of course I did that. I worked hard. I did go and work in a DGH. I was a consultant at the DGH for 6 years, but my interest in sport cardiology never, ever went down. I kept collecting data. We kept publishing. And it was then when I moved from King's to George's. I think that move to George's in 2010 was really a point of no return. It was the best thing that ever happened, apart from meeting Alison Cox, because we had space. You weren't competing for space, and that's one of the most important things, competing for space. We didn't have that. We had the UD where we could, run our tests. So we had dedicated cardiac physiologists employed by CRY that could support all of our research. So really thankful to cardiac risk in the young for that.
I think the impact of networking and building links like this is often underplayed as a part of research, but you've just demonstrated how important it is. So I want to understand how much of that networking conversation is a conscious thing on your part to try and move the research forwards, and how much of it is just getting to know people, having conversations, and then an idea just coming up out of serendipity?
I'm a strong believer that you should let your publications and your presentations do the work for you. So clearly, having received grants from Cardiac Risk in the Young and the British Heart Foundation and being successful with them does mean that, apart from publishing papers, you're on the podium speaking at the ESC, the AHA, the ACC, and all sorts of meetings. And I did try to make absolutely sure that I did speak on as many podia as possible so that our team got recognition. It was very important that the team got recognition. It wasn't just me. I wanted to put St. George's, certainly the sport cardiology and the inherited cardiac conditions team, on the map. And I think I did that successfully. And I think after you do that, you do get invited then to speak, even at, Imperial Medical School or St. George's Medical School, and speaking at even at sporting forums or podcasts. And it was really from there that people got to know us, made contact with us. And clearly, if you're onto a good thing, you've got to work very, very hard to make sure you hold on to it. And I think what a story I'll tell you was that, we look after so many Premier League clubs in London, such as, we started off looking after, things like Millwall and Leyton Orient. And then I got a call from Tottenham Hotspur saying, we'd like you to look after our players. And I really thought it was a joke. I thought someone was just teasing me because I'm a Tottenham Hotspur fan. So, of course, I said yes. And it was 2012. And this is what I mean by luck. And that was the year that Fabrice Muamba arrested at White Hart Lane. And it was just before that I took over looking after Spurs. So you can imagine the anxiety at Tottenham Hotspur when that happened. Yeah. And I ended up getting to know the team very, very well. And just having been, just having agreed to look after them. And from that came Chelsea. Chelsea wanted me to take over their care. Then came Manchester City. Then came Crystal Palace, and then West Ham. And then, of course, the one team that we didn't have, and I thought maybe it's because I'm a Spurs fan, is Arsenal. And it was only last year that they said, look, would you mind, we really need some, big cardiologists looking after our team. And I just said, gosh, I can't believe it, that it just seems to be just coming together, as things go on. But as I said, none of this is possible without a team. There is no way I could do this myself. So when we go to these big clubs, and when, that's where the networking takes place, because a physiotherapist from one club will say, use that team, they're absolutely brilliant, or, they've done this and they've done that. So the teams do it for you because you've given them such a good service. But I involve all of our fellows in all of this so that they get involved with what pre-participation screening looks like. They get trained in media. They don't get too startled by stars. They keep their heads on. That they can deal with the media very well. So all of that, the training is very broad, but it's been an interesting journey, and I'm very thankful to such a great team that we've been able to network collectively.
So in the final few minutes, I just wanted to ask for some takeaway messages for the fellows who haven't yet decided whether they're going to do research or where they're going to do research. What would you recommend they ask their potential supervisor to figure out if they're a good fit? I mean, what should they be looking for in someone like yourself?
Well, there are units that have got their strengths, and those strengths are well publicized on the internet. So if you've got someone, for example, who wants to be an MRA guru or wants to do something amazing in MRI, then clearly that sort of person would probably go and work at the Brompton or St Thomas's, because, or even Imperial now, because especially if I'm talking about London places, because they're well reputed in MRI and the research that they produce. Mm-hmm. In Oxford. I mean, I'm only talking about London, but but if you've got someone who wants to do intervention, they might want to seek help at King's or Imperial. And if you want someone who wants to do inherited cardiac diseases, it may be Bart's, maybe us at George's, maybe St Thomas's. And if you want to do sports cardiology, of course, I'm going to say us, but they've got to decide what they want to do. So the first thing is decide what you want to do your research in. Secondly, then go to the places where they've got the best reputation for that research. The supervisor will almost certainly agree to speak to you even before the interview to tell you what the setup is, what's expected, what sort of projects are available, and what their expectations are of the fellow. And so the fellow will realize at that point whether they're the right fit for this team or not. And most supervisors will paint a very, very positive picture about what they can offer that fellow. And that picture will be really based on their perception of the fellow during that initial conversation and the potential of that fellow based on the CV. So I would suggest that, you just firstly, if you're going to do research, decide what you want to do your research in. Are you doing your research because you want to become an academic? Most people have academic trajectories now, of course, but if they didn't, why are you doing it? Are you doing it because you might want to do research later on in that field of your own specialty? Pick the institution that punches out really good research in that situation, because you will learn not just research, but a lot of clinical aspects to that speciality. So that's what I would do. Go and speak to the supervisor, and you will know yourself as a fellow whether you're a right fit for that department.
That's fantastic advice. Once again, Prof Sharma, I wanted to say a big thank you for taking the time out. That's been really helpful, and I'm sure it'll be really well received. Thank you very much.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity. Thank you.
Join us next time on the podcast for...
There's always a temptation when you're doing research where there's no kind of end point. You're going down a path and saying, well, if I do this, then this might happen, and it would be great if this happened. And it is helpful to have someone just sort of sit you down and say, that's fine, but I would make sure that this is all tidied up for your DPhil.
I'm joined by Dr. Parag Gajendragadkar, who's a post-CCT fellow and a recent Wellcome Trust ACF, who talks about taking out-of-program research later on in the training program, as well as the interactions with the university and the challenges of writing up.